Hello and welcome to the Old Street Labs podcast. My name is Rob Woodhead and I am your host. Now, this podcast is dedicated to telling the stories of the humans behind the tech. And on this very first episode, we speak to Ben Burch. Ben is a tech entrepreneur and he is building a business called Allegr, which is helping to build communities both online and offline. And I thought I'd give you a bit of a flavour of what we spoke about. So we talked about his journey from being a Oxford University rower all the way through to becoming a tech entrepreneur. We spoke about his business Allegr and that being born out of very personal circumstances for him and how building communities is very important to him. We spoke about social media and the sometimes detrimental effect that has, and it certainly doesn't help with building communities. We spoke about the difficulties of building tech businesses and some of the pitfalls that you can face. We spoke about outsourcing and his experiences with that, especially with the tech development. And we spoke about his future and where he wanted to take the business. It was, from my perspective, really interesting conversation. And I hope you find it interesting too. If you have any feedback, I'd be very happy to hear it. But yeah, please enjoy. Welcome to the Old Street Labs podcast. The human stories behind the tech. From concept to code. Real startup journeys. Welcome to the Old Street Labs podcast. On this podcast, we endeavour to speak to interesting people in the tech ecosystem. And today, on the podcast, we have not only an old friend of mine, but also the co-founder of Allegr, a mission-led tech business. So Ben Burch, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
I appreciate you being on. With that little bit of an introduction to you, I've known you for something like 20 odd years. You've gone from Oxford University president of the boat club through financial tech consulting, and now building your own business. What has got you to that moment? What is the desire to build your own thing come from?
It's been quite a random journey, I suppose. I think I finished at Oxford. I was rowing, I was on the national team, and an injury kind of forced me out of sport and into a career. And I've never really followed the kind of conventional path, I suppose. So whilst everyone else disappeared off into the city, I got involved in a kind of retail e-commerce business. So I've always been involved in smaller businesses. Apart from a brief foray back into the city in 2008 when the global financial crisis kicked off, which was perfect timing. Yeah. So I've always been involved in businesses, and I guess as the years have gone on, you crystallize a little bit in terms of what you're prepared to do and not prepared to do, and as time went on, it became apparent that my skills and things I was interested in kind of forced me down to doing something myself, and that's kind of how we ended up doing something. But I've always been involved in that kind of entrepreneurial's used a lot these days, but always involved in that kind of either early stage or smaller business projects. Yeah.
So a natural progression for you to go from kind of helping those businesses out to actually building one yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And I think part of it is actually enjoying the variety of the challenge. So I wouldn't say I'm a specialist in any particular area, although I'd go I'd go relatively deep in some. But I like the variety, and with that variety, the new challenge that it brings. And I think, there's no more variety than running your own business. You have to wear every single hat. So that's where I think that kind of variety, and also the kind of challenge of that decision making, that's where it comes from.
Yeah, I think you and I both had pretty non-linear, non-traditional career paths, and yeah, the excitement that comes with running your own business is, something which I really enjoy as part of my kind of variety of decision making, or variety of things that you do during a day when you're running your own business, and things you would not have expected to do, I guess, as well from when on the outset. I know that Allegr was kind of born out of something which was very personal to you. Can you talk a little bit about the beginnings of the business and where it sprung from?
Yeah, sure. So, I've been involved in technology, or the kind of interface between business and technology for years. And get this right, 7 years ago, my third child was born, and during pregnancy we knew there was a problem with her heart, which was picked up very by chance in a scan. And anyway, the long and short of it was, after she was born and 4 days later, so after 4 days, she was on the operating table having open heart surgery. And I was quite typically male about the whole thing beforehand. I was a bit like, here's this child, and I'll deal with it. I'll kind of package it up and deal with the emotions later and all the rest of it. And I think it's fair to say I underestimated that, and it just hit me like a train. And it was a very weird experience for a period of time. She was in intensive care. She had the operation, although it went well, triggered full heart bypass, which wasn't expected. She had anaphylactic shock to that bypass, so it all kind of escalated. And in a quite condensed period of about sort of seven days, everything stood still. And it just forced me to reflect on, just quite sort of deeply, like what I was doing and why I was doing it. And it just became apparent to me that I was involved in technology. Technology is, everywhere and changing the world for good or for bad. But there was, I wanted to make sure that what I was doing with technology, which is where my primary skills lie, was actually doing something really beneficial for what we all are at the end of the day, which is human beings. And that's where it started. That was the kind of trigger. Following on from it very rapidly was I organised, as you're familiar with, I'm a bit of a kind of loon when it comes to taking on challenges, physical challenges, and I organised a sponsored run, a charity run. And that run was simple in conception. I was going to run 100 kilometres, and people were going to join me along the way. I was going to rope in mates to kind of do 5, 10, 15 kilometres. And what happened in that process was something.
Sorry, no, keep going, Ben. Sorry, I was gonna mention that I managed to do a very, very, very small part of that, which is 5 kilometers, and it was quite astounding that you managed to pull off 100. But anyway, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, there's that, but I was more impacted by what happened during the run, which was people came to do 5, like yourself. But many people came to do 5 and they ended up doing 15, or they came to do 10 and they did 30, right? So all these, and the other bit that was interesting was not many people knew each other. They knew, through me or through someone else, there was a bit of a connection and all the rest of it, but it wasn't like everyone was just mates. But what happened was we had this sort of train, I suppose, of people that just went through the day, and there was this kind of collective community, right? This real, genuine collective community, and it was simple when you boil it down. There was a reason, there was a common purpose, there was a shared experience, there was all these things, and after it finished and all the rest of it, it just became apparent, like somehow we had to do that again. Like, how could you get that to happen again? And as it transpired, I then did do another series of 12 of them. But the idea was like running 100 kilometers is not the thing that has to be done again. What we actually need to do is spend more time with each other and find ways for people to do more stuff with each other. And that's where the kind of essence of the kind of Allegr and the kind of platform came from, was this actually really basic concept, which is we just need to spend more time in the presence of each other doing stuff. And that was the genesis of it, really.
It's interesting because in the context of COVID and how we all a little bit went into our shells in COVID and spent lots of time without community around, without people around, I remember coming on that run and thinking how interesting it was I think you did it pre-COVID, right? And having that amazing bunch of people who I didn't know. I knew one or two people vaguely, but it was a very encouraging bunch. And you're there for doing something good, but also you're there to benefit your own mental health. And such a fabulous way to start something. So then you kind of started this community. You were doing these runs. What then turned it into a business?
Yeah, well, it just became apparent to me that, and the others involved, that it was technology had to be the catalyst to get this to happen. Like, I don't want people to be on their phones. I think it's wildly destructive. I've got 3 kids. I see I see the dangers. I see the risk. It's really, really not good. But I'm also a realist. It's not going away. So how do we shift the balance and say, right, let's use technology for what it should be doing? Like, use it for good. Use it to be the catalyst. Like, use its power to get people to do stuff. And so that was the reason to kind of formulate the kind of business and plan, was to build a platform that was all about letting technology kind of sink into the background, but be a kind of positive catalyst for people meeting up, for people doing stuff, for people challenging themselves, accomplishing all the kind of good stuff. That's how it began.
And I guess you saw the other social platforms that were out there as not providing anything like that service.
Yeah, I think, without getting on my soapbox about all the problems of social media, it's clear that their goals are not aligned, right? Social media is nothing social. There is nothing social about social media. It's an advertising platform. All the metrics, all the actions, all the engagement is about market building, not community building, and that's what it's all about. And they don't really want you to meet up, and they don't really want you to do, because that's off their platform, and that's not as valuable. And so we had to come up with something that was to some appears similar, right? It looked, oh yes, look, you can do these things, you can do these kind of functions, but fundamentally had to be completely different, because otherwise, the pressures of kind of making some revenue and commercial pressures would force us in the inevitable direction of where they all end up. And so we had to think about it differently, and we had to think about it about ensuring that we kind of held some pretty strong values and opinions about the use of technology, the use of data, why we were in existence, and that's where we ended up, and why we are nothing like social media when you actually drill down into the details of what we do.
So great, and that's super interesting, and I think a lot of people have a difficulty with social media, and a difficulty with how it it's trying to make money out of you and your data. So I completely understand that. You started the journey. We helped you to kind of ideate and design and build a product. What was the first step in terms of actually kind of getting customers on board and getting users of the platform?
Yeah, so one of the things we needed to do was to think about finding communities that were currently underserved, right? So the thing we needed to address was we had this kind of concept and this platform around getting people together, but what we didn't have was a massive budget, and we didn't have endless resources, and so we couldn't really go with a kind of direct to consumer approach because we'd just get wiped out by the metas and the Facebook, the meta, all the rest of it, because we were not offering something which direct to a consumer was appealing enough in that regard. And so we had to think about, well, how do we approach this? And that was when we kind of so me and Rachel were kind of initially kind of founded the kind of concept, and then that's when Robin got back involved. So Robin is a friend who was at university at the same time as us. He had been in the army. He'd been working, living in Africa, and had just moved back to the UK. And it was him joining the kind of team that brought us this army or military connection. And when you look at communities and you look at groups, there's lots of shared similarities. If you look at sports teams or you look at the army or you look at new parents, all these different communities have very similar kind of fundamentals about what brings them together. And so when we looked at the military, we realized that there was a real opportunity here, right? You have a particularly in the veteran space. So you have large numbers of people with a shared sense of kind of identity, but a transition in terms of their kind of circumstance. So you have this kind of unsettling period of time, which is, I used to be in the army and now I'm not, but everything I identify myself is kind of linked back to the army, or the other services. Not dissimilar to my experience a lot longer ago when I was a rower. I was like, I'm a rower. This is what I do, and now I'm injured and I'm not a rower, right? It's a big shift. Same thing happens. I'm a adult. I make the joke of I'm a happy adult, and now I have children, right? There are all these kind of transitions and shifts that occur. Anyway, the military seemed to be one where we had a way in, which was through Robin, because it's a kind of closed door, because it's not a kind of commercial entity. The way the army or the veteran landscape is structured is not kind of open, and we don't need to sort of dwell too much on that. But it's all regimental. It's all kind of closed little pockets. But we had a way in, and that's how it started. It was like, let's go to his old regiment. People will be familiar. There's the veteran mental health is a significant challenge in places, and what do many veterans want? They want to feel that they belong back to their kind of their community, their regiment, their identity, etc., etc. And so what we're offering was a tool to help that, and that's where the kind of the veteran or the military app, as we call it, that's where it began.
Amazing. And so now it's providing a community for veterans, for them to connect with each other and for them to find activities to do, and to get themselves back, speaking to people that they feel akin with. Is that right?
Exactly. It's like there's this immediate trust, which is if you were in the Fusiliers or the Royal Anglians or the whichever regiment, you might not know the person, but if they served at some point. There's just that little bit of shared common ground, and then that's enough of if we're thinking about kind of engagement and getting people to do stuff or turn up to an event, that's enough to get them to do it, or potentially, and so that became the kind of starting point, and and it's not just veterans; it's veterans and serving and their families. It's a kind of broader church, but that was the kind of concept. And it's not other people. You take it outside the army. People will understand the same thing if they support a football team. That it's only a little bit of common ground you need before you have something to hang the rest of that random conversation on the tube on, right? If there's that common ground. And so once you've got that initial hook, the rest of it becomes possible, and that's really where we look to kind of improve upon all these opportunities.
Yeah, I know that you'll laugh at this, but you know that I used to play hockey, and hockey was always, similar to you. It was a part of your identity. It was I'm a hockey player, and then you stop and you feel a little lost sometimes, and finding it. Well, one, you want to remain in that community as much as you can, but two, you want to find new communities that you can be part of. I also think the point that this isn't a Facebook group. It isn't a third-party platform trying to masquerade as something. It is actually the institution, or the in the military example, it's the regiment that you were part of. They own the group, or they own the platform that you provided them. It means you have that trust. You have that. Well, actually, it belongs to them. It reminds me of the alumni network that is very strong in the US, and all these universities and sports teams have them in the US. We're not quite so good at it here in the UK. My university hockey team, they're doing their best, but they use things like Facebook groups and so on to do that. Whereas a lot of people aren't on Facebook. People like me have come off Facebook, so it's hard to connect with those kind of people.
Yeah, exactly, and I think that's that's what we've seen. We've seen it in the military, and like you allude to, I guess we've. We have the same thing with rowing. I guess rowing is bigger at Oxford than hockey is, but still has the same challenges that as an alumni network that hockey would. And I think America, if you look across the pond, they do a remarkably good job at fostering that kind of sense of belonging, but they have the same challenges, right? Which is the tools that are out there are not really helping, not genuinely helping connection. They're at a tangent. They're driving behaviours that are not necessarily conducive. And you hear a lot of people say, "I've come off Facebook," and we have there is a challenge, right? Which is lots of regimental associations or charities use Facebook, and part of me is saying, look, you shouldn't. If you use that tool, people have to also get involved with everything else it does, and we know that's negative. So there's this kind of there's this contradiction. It's like you're out there saying we support our veterans, or we support our alumni, or we support our whoever, but if your mechanism for support is through a tool that is not without harm, and I'm not saying it harms everyone, but it is not net. I would argue it's not a net positive. Therefore, you've kind of created a bit of a challenge to that situation, and that's one of the reasons why, we steer clear of it and use, and that's one of the kind of foundations of our platform.
Interesting. Going back to the kind of building business piece, you've done a lot of technical consulting. You've looked at other small businesses. What have you brought from that experience into Allegr, and kind of what have you brought as the learnings, I guess, across, and that anyone watching this might be able to kind of learn from as well?
Well, I think there's a phrase the military uses, which is "no plan survives contact." I think that's probably a good place to start. Nothing, no business plan, no structure, no nothing will. It's a great idea and it's a great concept around testing theories and stuff. You're going to have to work really hard at, and you're going to have to adapt really quickly. They're the most obvious things. From a technology point of view, I think it's becoming more challenging almost. Technology has always been a market in my eyes that's been very imperfect. you could get some website built for £500, £5,000, or £500,000, and often, to all intents and purposes, the consumer's experience of those things will be similar. So the market's quite fragmented and broken, and we'll all have experienced this in our day-to-day life. Of some things are free or very cheap. They're like a few quid as a subscription, and if you're in the business world, the next version suddenly is like £20,000 or £100,000, and it's like, well, how the hell's that working? So from a I think from a technology perspective, it is quite challenging to know how to navigate that. And I think the main thing with that, and ever more now, is that it's changing so fast. Everything is changing that you have to hold on to stuff really lightly, and really expect to be changing, sadly or frustratingly, changing systems, changing processes, and adapting more frequently than you really want to. And that can be disruptive, and it can be quite challenging. But you have to think like that, otherwise you're going to get stuck. Because look around you. What happened? What was possible 3 months ago? What was possible 6 months ago is done in a flash now, and next month it will be done before you've even thought about it. So it's a really difficult time. It's a really difficult time to manage that. So I think you have to really stay kind of, I guess, sort of light on your feet, if that's the right phrase, and just accept that you just won't know the answers, but you've got to do something, and then adapt and accept that things have to get replaced and moved on, which is I guess not that helpful, but it is. Maybe I suppose the thing that's helpful is, even if someone's been doing it for as long as I have, I'm still making those same decisions and mistakes and changes, right? So there is no perfect answer. So you have to just keep that very kind of adaptive approach, and talk to people, because guess what? You won't be the first person that's tried to solve the problem you're solving. It's been done before. The chances are it's been done before.
We see it a lot, I think, in all the different early stage founders we meet, and trying to talk to them about if they're going to build something, let's not build absolutely everything. Let's not try and boil the ocean. Let's try and deliver something simple and quick, so that not only are you trying to solve a small problem to begin with, but also knowing that things can change so quickly, as you say, that building absolutely everything in one go, waiting for 6, 12, 18 months before you deliver something to the market, the world will have moved on significantly by then. So you've got to get something out sooner, test it, get feedback, talk to people as quickly as you can.
Yeah, definitely.
What are some of the mistakes that you've made that you would warn against as you've gone through this process?
I'm not sure we got long enough for that, have we? I take a fairly. I try and be quite constructive about the sort of endless mistakes I make, and try and you try and glean some kind of value out of them. I remember early on, not before Allegr, I was doing some more kind of tech, more just kind of traditional software development type stuff, and we built a lot of things. And for a while, and I distinctly remember this, I was up for nights and nights building these clusters of servers that were all to basically hosting emails, right? They were basically hosted Exchange. Exchange is the system behind Microsoft emails, and I was building these clusters, and I was like, oh my god, I'm doing this all on my own. This is amazing, like look at my skills. And then I did it all, and I put a sizable amount of money into it, I suppose, in real terms, as well as a hell of a lot of time. And then Microsoft launched Office 365, and I'm like, oh, Right. And it was foolish because, of course, I suspect if I'd done a load of research, I could have understood that was even on their product roadmap and it was coming and all the rest of it. But I was kind of in the weeds and I was doing stuff and I was working for these clients and they needed this system. And I was like, well, hang on, there's an opportunity here because I can build this. And it was all kind of made sense. But at the same time, I wasn't looking, what's the phrase? We couldn't see the wood for the trees. And I just basically dived in. And the thing that technology can do is it can consume colossal amounts of time, because you're forever so close to fixing the final bug, and that final bug or that final issue that should take 10 minutes could take 10 hours. And so you've got to be really careful in that. And I think that's not that particular error, I suppose, was just consumed weeks of time, and money, and then had nothing apart from a completely irrelevant pat on my own back about what I'd managed to build that was completely worthless. So that was an example. But I think it's the thing with technology is being aware of the time drain that things can take, and you get sort of stuck down these rabbit holes, and that can be really really challenging, because I think there's a bit of a piece between the nature of the kind of person that works with technology and their desire to get to kind of solve the problem, and those two together mean sometimes weeks disappear and there's nothing at the other side of it. And we see and we know, we see this in development projects and software development all the time. Like developers head down, get on with the task, and come back up a week later and say I've finished, but it was meant to take an hour and it took a week, and if you just asked a question at the beginning, we could have saved that whole time. So it's that kind of stuff, I think, in technology that's really really the challenge, to keep your eyes open to that before you literally step into a black hole and never come out again.
Yeah, I mean, you and I both know that exceptionally well. What's interesting is that as you were talking about that made me think of where we are with generative AI a little bit at the moment, in that you get the first 80% of the way there very quickly, but then trying to get the bugs out and trying to fix what's been written by something else, by the machine, is actually really hard, and the final piece can drain all the time you saved can then go into that, making sure that it actually works at the end point.
Absolutely, and I think, I laugh about the kind of I use some of those AI tools to build stuff, and it makes me laugh because actually it's exactly like it is working, developing something where you nearly think you've got there, and that the last task takes you all the time you thought you'd saved. It's just made it different. It's like the same problem, same thing. And I do think the kind of technology is a bit at fault here. Like, I think we've created so many layers and layers of like framework upon framework and stuff, that, and all this kind of abstraction of all these processes, that we've actually just kind of created a bit of a mess. I say we, the industry has, and like you say, the kind of GenAI tools are incredible, but as equally frustrating as working with a team, a development team, on trying to get a task done, because you're so close and yet you don't get it. You don't get over the line for a while. So, but that's the nature of it, I guess.
Yeah, very much so. So going back to Allegr and the business, what are you seeing as the user base at the moment? Where is the business at the moment? How's it doing? How are you testing the temperature as you work now?
Yeah, so we're pretty good in the UK. I say good in terms of kind of coverage in the UK military space. We've got a pretty reasonable pipeline of new regiments and corps coming on. It's probably a bit early to say, but we're the kind of dominant player, if there is one, in terms of what we're doing. And to date, the kind of the competition in the market that did exist is sort of we've kind of absorbed. We're starting to take their clients and stuff. So so I think in that regard we're doing well. Let's be clear. The UK military veteran space is not a wildly commercial and lucrative lucrative from that regard, but in terms of like impact and actually achieving really what we're all about, it's been really good, and we've had there's tons of loads of really amazing stories about how people have kind of either got back in touch or actually really kind of quite serious challenges have been solved by their kind of their re-engagement with their community through the platform. So that's really really good and impactful, and hopefully we can keep growing that and sort of widen that community a bit. We work with regimental, typically with the regimental charities, so they have a kind of mandate over kind of veteran and support. But there's also the sort of next tier of some of the bigger military charities, and that kind of how it all weaves together and stuff. And that's probably our next, as that kind of grows out a bit, we'll start to pick up some of that as well, and just look to kind of build out the kind of engagement levels, because we're not going after an easy market. A lot, as you imagine. Yes, of course, there's a load of veterans that are younger, but a lot of the veterans are a lot older, and we're trying to use technology to get them to do stuff. Well, that's not easy. That's not low hanging fruit when it comes to doing stuff. So we're kind of we're pushing hard, and we're achieving success, and it's working. We're getting really good, really positive, both feedback and information supporting that. So that's really good.
Yeah, I mean, it's having watched you build the business from the sidelines. It's super impressive to where you've got it to, and it's not only about just the number of users, but the impact you're having. Like you said, I remember you telling me about the Bristol University study about how impactful it is and how much it's helping veterans who are having a really tough time with all sorts of issues post working like being in the military. So
Yeah, and not only that, it's actually we've always had this phrase of like, it's not the number of people we impact, it's the depth of impact, right? So I'd rather we had five people really made a huge difference than 50 people change their morning routine like some sort of TikTok influencer might generate. What we want to do is actually make a difference, and that means accepting kind of slightly different outcomes to lots of these other platforms, because to actually make a difference, you've got to get people to do stuff over the long term, and that's it's a different motivation, it's a different engagement, it's a different set of things that need to happen. And one thing that we want to do, and it's actually really hard to measure and really hard to think about, or to kind of articulate, but we want to bring, if we imagine that the sort of, some people, everyone in their life will face some challenge, right? I mean, you just won't get through life without some challenge. And we're now both at the age of like, when people see that, you see a lot more of it, right? You've got, people have got sort of aging parents, they may or may not have children, they're at the kind of coalface of life, as it were. And what we're trying to do is understand that if people are still talking to their mates and still meeting up with people and still engaging on a human level and all the rest of it, we're not a crisis prevention line or anything like that, but what we are is trying to shift that kind of challenge earlier, right? You're less likely to get to crisis of any description if you can talk about it and all the rest of it. And we're not, we talk about these things kind of openly, but we're not a mental health platform. We're not a mental health, thing. We have tools in there to help, but that's not what we're about. We're actually about trying to solve the problem at source, which is pick up on things like the blue zones studies and around the kind of areas of the world where the people live for the longest. It's kind of like trying to encourage those behaviours. I don't really mind what happens down the line, but we do know if those behaviours are taking place and people are spending time with each other and are feeling like they have a sense of identity and a sense of purpose and all the rest of it, they're less likely to get further down the kind of, how do you want to describe it, the kind of risk curve. And so that's how we approach it. That's how we're thinking. That's what we're trying to achieve. And so it's hard to measure all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So actually what we do is we just say, let's just make sure those building blocks are happening. Human nature will take, the rest will take care of itself. Like, you don't need to measure that. If people are doing things more frequently, that's okay by us. We don't need to kind of over optimize that. And that's the kind of way of thinking, which is of course wildly different to all the kind of tech KPI, measure every bit of data to within an inch of its life territory, which is that's what you do if you're trying to sell advertising on social media, right? So
yeah, very interesting. Just taking a different approach to how you look at it all, and seeing how you measure those kind of, well, not even measure them, but just make sure those impacts are actually happening. What's next then? What's the part of the business which is you're going to be pushing? Obviously more into the military and veterans associations. Are there I know that you're talking to the boat club at Oxford. What else are you pushing at the moment?
Yeah. So next is going back to the greatest sport on the planet, which obviously
is it a sport?
It's rowing. Yeah. It's going back to, it's looking at rowing as a thing, and that's broadly, of course, back to the same idea of like, what do we understand? Robin rowed as well with me. What do we understand? It's not football, right? It's not a big, high paid, big support through big clubs, any of that sort of stuff. So it has similarities to the military in that regard. But there's a strong sense of purpose and a strong sense of belonging and all the allegiance stuff. So we're looking at rowing clubs or colleges and universities as communities, right? So, and that's a slight twist. There's an element of a sort of twist there in terms of they're looking at fundraising is an important part of what they do to try and support their clubs. But yeah, so sports and sports clubs are the next kind of area, and we're about to launch. I guess by the time this goes out, we will have launched one of our first US colleges in that. So again, that's going to be an area of growth, hopefully. Similar product, but again, it's all white labeled, so we just it's all then rowing centric, but fundamentally the same underlying thing. We could even, we could look at hockey at some stage if you need. I
think that would be pretty interesting. I mean, hockey was, I'm not sure if it still is, the biggest participation sport in the UK. So because you have equal footing for men and women. But anyway, that we can discuss that further as we always do. But there's plenty of other options for you, right? Lots of other sports, but lots of other different kind of networks of communities which have old members and things like that.
When we did some work early on actually, and it was kind of interesting. It was looking at the kind of inputs of these things. So just sort of across to looking at the kind of different character traits and different things and stuff, and then mapping it to like what we were doing. And actually, then when we did it back in the other direction, it just fits for everything, which is some sense of identity. Well, any club, school, sport, anything has that. Okay, some stronger, some weaker. A sense of purpose and kind of group, kind of purpose and belonging. And I know, lots of these words are banded around everywhere now, but some kind of thing that brings people together. And and this sort of sense of community, and then this desire to and then transition from either into or out of that. So sport and retirement, adult to parent, serving soldier to veteran. All those transition points are actually really quite destabilizing, kind of from an identity perspective. And so that's the area when you look at any of these communities, all of them, I say all of them, but the vast majority have that going on, and therefore there's an opportunity to speak to those people and help bring them back in, and realize if you were a hockey player then you still you might not be playing anymore, but you still have a sense of understanding, and then that shared kind of that common ground.
Yeah. You can see, very easily how it can be applied to so many different areas. So yeah, fantastic, and hopefully a good, lots of things to explore and expand into as well. I wanted to touch on, obviously, we as a business, Old Street Labs, helped you design and build the product. What was it like working with an external team? You've obviously had teams yourself and worked with people directly under you. What was it like working with, our guys are all in the Philippines? How was that for you?
Yeah, so it was a nightmare. I mean, God, what was I thinking?
Well, that's a bad question.
No, I mean, I think, I guess I went in with my eyes open, right? Which is, I've worked with technology teams, both internal and external before. I've also worked across, with remote teams as well as local teams. I think the bit, for kind of the purpose of this, this kind of question and stuff, Old Street has a good mix of that kind of local contact, right? So the kind of obviously speaking to you, and or the Robs, as you're affectionately named, but obviously having that kind of local contact and therefore kind of understanding and trust, and then obviously it's been actually as we've got the same people working who started the project, right? So the same resource, so that's worked really well. I think it's one of those things where there are differences and challenges with some of it, but they are inevitable, and they're as much down to they're down to both parties to kind of stop and think about and understand. And we've mentioned it earlier, but I think a lot of it comes down just to the very nature of the type of people that software developers are. They will often, rather than if you say something's broken or needs fixing, they will often dive in and start fixing with no update and no communication, and then they'll say, I've done it, rather than talk about it along the way. That's not, I don't think that's unique. That's the mindset of the kind of person that loves to solve a problem. And the kind of person that loves to solve a problem is exactly who you want working on your projects. So you have to understand that is just, it's a way of communicating that's a bit different, and it can sometimes feel a bit disconnected. That's not an Old Street thing. That's a general, I've seen that everywhere I've worked. But I think the process of, the kind of the way of working and the level of, the overall level of communication and the way of working and the kind of openness is really quite good and refreshing. I think it's a much more interactive relationship than one of my pet hates, I suppose, on IT has always been this kind of like requirement to project manager to and by the time it gets to the person doing the task, you might as well have written it in a different language. It's just like it's so lost. And I've always had this when I had my own teams. I made a point of removing QA or testers from the process, because I wanted my developers to realize if they did something that caused a problem, they had to understand the impact of it and understand that it does have a real impact. It's not just a bug, or another task. Like, there's a real kind of connected impact to that. And I think that's why, certainly in the case of Old Street, the developers are on the calls. Yeah. You get, if they have a question or they don't, they've heard it from you, they've heard it firsthand. And I think that's so vital because if you think about it, when you get to deep in the weeds of writing some function or code or whatever, if you don't really know why you're writing it, you are going to make assumptions. Minor they may be, but you're going to make assumptions, and you're going to create a less good product at the end of the day, because fundamentally you don't know what it's going to do when it gets out into the wild. And that, I think, is one of the things that you guys do well, is bringing the team into the entire conversation. Now, of course, not everyone will understand everything, because you'll get some annoying customer like me who's like going all around the houses and explaining stuff. But at least they're part of the conversation. If they're part of the conversation, they've got a chance to understand the context. And if they've got the context, there's a better hope that they'll have a better product out the other side of it.
Yeah, I mean, I concur with everything you said. I think, I always speak about this, the communication being absolutely paramount, and it's the communication bridge between the client, what's in the client's brain about what they want to build, to the developer's brain to get into actually creating the code which is building it. And that has to go, if there's too many people in the way, it has to go through too many people, and as you say, it becomes Chinese whispers. And we are kind of trying to create a team where that communication is as smooth as possible. We're not perfect at it. I mean, it's very difficult to get absolutely spot on with it, but providing situations where the developers can understand things in the best possible way, I stand there and it's quite helpful sometimes as a non-technical person to be able to say, on behalf of the developer, can you explain that in a bit of an easier way, or on behalf of the client, hey developer, can you explain the problem in a more non-technical manner? But yeah, it's a constant work in progress for us, I think, that communication piece.
Yeah, and that won't be solved soon. But I think the other aspect is that there's a lot of the technology world is so hung up on process, and they'll talk about, stuff that makes my just sends me mad about, as if the project management process is actually the point, and they get so stuck in that they forget the purpose of it. And I've always had this belief, like, and to a point, I think we can probably prove that out with what we're building with Allegr. I've always had this belief, like, give me a team of a few developers on their own, nothing around them, and we can build anything. And okay, within reason, right? But we can get something done. And that's because I think if you've got people, if the person writing stuff really gets it and is responsible for it and understands what they're doing, they will also ask far better questions about why am I doing this, or can I solve it this other way, rather than that kind of downstream process that's tied up in all those lovely things that people fuss about, like scrums and all that other jargon. I think that's the point. You've got to remember that at the end of the day, it's about the final product and the output. If it was an academic exercise in IT architecture, great. There's a place for that. But actually, and especially in this day and age where the speed of development, and you can choose a framework to write your software in, and I guarantee in 6 months there'll be a very compelling case why it's wrong and you should write it all again. Well, that's my point, right? You've got to focus on the final thing, and be prepared to throw a bunch away and start a bunch again and move on. And that's back to that kind of startup mentality that I think is something that's kind of knitted into the way you guys operate.
Yeah. I think this topic is something which you and I could speak on endlessly about, and perhaps we'll do another podcast about technical process and everything else some other time. But for now, Ben, I really appreciate you being on. I've got one last question, which is: if Allegro was a band or an artist, who would it be and why?
Oh my God.
It's a bit of a left field one, I know.
So considering my music knowledge is like, I mean, I have been known to run 100 kilometers a few times. I've also been known to run 90% of that listening to like Coldplay on loop. So
my lord,
my thing, I just wouldn't know.
I mean, you can say Coldplay if you want.
I don't know. It had to be one of those songs that kind of taps into the whole kind of making the most. I'll have to look it up. I'll have to say, I mean, for that reason alone, I'll just have to say Coldplay because it's all in there. There'll be a song in there somewhere, but I'm not. That's not really my. You've completely skewered me with my ability there.
Well, never mind. Perhaps you can tell me later, and I can put it in the link with the podcast. So,
I've got a song in mind, but I'm not sure it's. I'd have to sense check it before I try to blurt it out.
Fine. If anyone's listening to this and wants to get in touch and wants to talk about Allegro or anything you've done, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously not on social media. So, I mean, our website, so allegr.org, so ALLEGR.org. The military app is again the same, militaryapp.org, but through LinkedIn. But yeah, the Allegr.org has got some stuff about the platform, and there's a bit about that kind of technology, I guess, sort of manifesto sounds a bit strong, but that kind of those kind of technology values, which I think actually, I mean, personally, I think we could do the world would be a better place if we spend a bit of time thinking about them, and actually realise that technology should be in the background and the enabler, and I think that would right lots of wrongs. But yeah, certainly the website is probably the best place to get hold of us. Okay,
great. Ben, thank you so much for being on. Super interesting to hear all about Allegro and what you've been up to and how you've gone about it. And best of luck for the future with it, and look forward to continuing to work with you.
Yeah, cheers. Well, thanks for having me, and I will see you very soon.
All the best. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Old Street Labs podcast. We'd love to hear from you, so connect with us on LinkedIn or on our website at old.st.